I just finished reading Speak Memory, which is Nabokov's autobiography, up through 1940, which is roughly the first half of his life. From 1940, for about 20 years, he lived in the United States. And then he moved to Switzerland, where he lived another chunk of time, another 20 years. I've taken some notes, and after seeing these notes scrawled on a single little note card like this, I think what I would say is that if there is an underlying metaphysics behind Nabokov's writings, or let's say there is a philosophy, a Nabokovian philosophy. The way I would describe that, the way I would encapsulate that philosophy, is that these subjects, mortality, memory, poetry, and love, are interconnected and perhaps even the same. And I thought what I would do for the next few minutes is read through these quotes and see what you think. Nabokov is, I don't need to tell you this, but Nabokov is an extraordinarily beautiful language. What did I say? He is an extraordinarily beautiful language. He writes extraordinarily beautiful language. Although I kind of like saying Nabokov is an extraordinary beautiful language. I think you would agree with that too, that his life existed not because he wrote, but by being written. There's a distinction there that I think is important. So my first Nabokov was Ada. That was the first of his works that I read. I read it for the first time nearly 40 years ago. Nearly 40 years ago. I was at Bates College. It was a winter break, and I had stayed on campus when most everyone had left. There were no courses. The campus itself was kind of closed for the break. And so I stayed in a boarding room just off campus, just across the street. And I picked up Ada from the library. I don't know why. And I read it and knew at the time that I was missing a lot. I mean, there are emotional peaks in that book that are in Russian, in French, and some other languages. But the narrative itself is quite complex. And there's a wonderful interplay of overlapping narratives. There's an editorial voice that's a 90-year-old Van Veen commenting on texts that may have been written 30 years before that about events that happened 50 years before that. Right? And at the center of that book is a treatise on time and memory. But what Nabokov has done with the book is not write about that philosophy, but write that philosophy. As you read the book, and I've probably read that book a dozen times now, maybe. The line between the story, the memory of the characters, the act of writing, and my act of reading really does merge. So in his autobiography, Speak Memory is an exhortation. I read it as an exhortation, almost like a Greek bard, as if Homer were calling for memory, the muse to speak. And the distinction between writing the memory and being the memory, I hope that distinction is one that becomes clearer, or at least I hope I can articulate a little bit better as I read from some of these examples. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I don't want to be here all day, so I might not read all 7. But this first quote from page 50, at the end of chapter 2, is the articulation of mortality. Whenever, I was going to say a lot more then, and then I realized the best thing to do is to just read it. So page 50 of my vintage edition. Whenever in my dreams I see the dead, they always appear silent, bothered, strangely depressed, quite unlike their dear, bright selves. I am aware of them without any astonishment in surroundings they never visited during their earthly existence, in the house of some friend of mine they never knew. They sit apart, frowning at the floor, as if death were a dark taint, a shameful family secret. It is certainly not then, not in dreams, but when one is wide awake, at moments of robust joy and achievement, on the highest terrace of consciousness, right? That mortality has a chance to peer beyond its own limits. From the mast, from the past and its castle tower. And although nothing much can be seen through the mist, there is somehow the blissful feeling that one is looking in the right direction. Mortality, the constraints of this finite being. Where was I? Mortality, the constraints of this finite being. What allows us to see beyond that is sort of joyful, clear consciousness. Robust joy, the highest terrace of consciousness. That's what allows us to see beyond mortality. And what is there beyond mortality? There's a myth. We don't know. Nabokov's not making any claims about an afterlife. But there's a blissful feeling of knowing that this view is the right direction, that there's a truth behind this sensation. So, not immortality, but not mortality, not death, but not life, consciousness, vivacious, vibrant, vital consciousness at least gives an intimation of what extends beyond the normal physical sensations. I think this is a really powerful statement, not about an afterlife, but about the real mystery of being. And because it's Nabokov and because beautiful experience is kind of intrinsic in his value of life. Even in this simple paragraph, the idea that when we are most exalted is when we can see beyond the limits of our body and get an idea, an intimation, an anticipation that could sustain, that experience could be sustained. So the next quote I have is from page 100. This is short, but he's starting to describe memory. And what I pick up from these is that memory is not a distant artifact. It is suffused in our presence, in our present, our presence, and our presence. That a memory is why didn't I read what he said? He's describing a moment where he's remembering in Russia when he was a boy, a scene in the snow. And now here he is, older, in New England, in the snow. And he says, all is still, spellbound, enthralled by the moon, fancy's rear vision mirror. The snow is real, though, and as I bend to it and scoop up a handful, 60 years crumble to glittering frost dust between my fingers. The memory, and I don't think that's a metaphor for memory vanishing. I think it's a resonance for the moment of recollection. Page 118. Distant time flies. Oh, sorry, no. In those distant times whose long light finds so many ingenious ways to reach me. The rays of the past are present. Memory is not artificial. It is as real an experience in the moment as my finger snap or the slight discomfort because my hair is growing a little long under here. The long light of distant times is well, let me continue to read what Nabokov says. Page 139. I confess I do not believe in time. Before I read the rest of this, I'm with him on this. I don't believe in time either. I experience time. We experience time as sequential, sort of cut up moments, but that is an evolutionary statement, an evolutionary stage that is necessary for survival and for coherence. But the cost of that coherence is sort of authenticity. So I'm interpreting when he says time here as linear and chronological time rather than eternity, the lack of time, the end of time. It's why I love that Messiaen piece, the Quartet for the End of Time, so much. It fits right into that philosophy, and the Eliot four quartets. I have a constellation of fetish items: Messiaen quartet, the Eliot Four Quartets, Ada. I confess I do not believe in time. I like to fold my magic carpet after use in such a way as to superimpose one part of the pattern upon another. Let visitors trip, and the highest enjoyment of timelessness in a landscape selected at random is when I stand among rare butterflies and their food plants. This is ecstasy, and behind the ecstasy is something else, which is hard to explain. Tell me about it. It is like a momentary vacuum into which rushes all that I love, a sense of oneness with sun and stone, a thrill of gratitude to whom it may concern, to the contrapuntal genius of human fate, or to tender ghosts humoring a lucky mortal. So that ecstasy, and behind the ecstasy, the something else behind the ecstasy, that I think is that vital consciousness that alights and allows us to see beyond mortality that he talked about in the first quote. I think he's returning back to this idea and introducing then the idea of love rushing into that. Time and memory are secondary to that. They are a frippery. They are, the time part is, they are something that can be manipulated in words or in art to create an experience for a visitor, but underneath it is this ecstasy, and there's a clarity to it that's just consistent. And then this last phrase here, a thrill of gratitude to the contrapuntal genius of human fate, or to tender ghosts humoring a lucky mortal. Kind of covering all bases for how the universe may work. A lovely quote. Page 212. His awareness. Okay. This is a section I like because the writer, Nabokov, the writer, is very clear. He says, I did not know then, parentheses, as I know perfectly well now, end parentheses, what to do with such things. And such things are a sunset, almost formidable in its splendor, lingering in the fully exposed sky. So he says, here's a sunset. And then he says, when I saw that sunset, he's remembering this sunset and a woman in the sunset. He didn't know what to do with it when he was 15, 16, 17. But then 2 paragraphs later, he shows us what to do with it. And now he doesn't say, let me show you. He simply does it. I recall, so remember, right, the summer evenings of my boyhood when I used to ride by her cottage speak to me in that voice of hers now. I did not know then, as I know perfectly well now, what to do with that. And I recall, just read the book, right? But this section, I recall one particular sunset. It lent an ember to my bicycle bell. The reflection of the sunset is an ember in his bicycle bell. It's just freaking beautiful. Overhead, above the black music of telegraph wires, a number of long, dark violet clouds lined with flamingo pink hung motionless in a fan-shaped arrangement. The whole thing was like some prodigious ovation in terms of color and form. It was dying, however, and everything else was darkening too. But just above the horizon, in a lucid turquoise space beneath a black stratus, the eye found a vista that only a fool could mistake for the spare parts of this or any other sunset. It occupied a very small, sector of the enormous sky and had the peculiar neatness of something seen through the wrong end of a telescope. There it lay in wait, a family of serene clouds in miniature, an accumulation of brilliant convolutions, anachronistic in their creaminess and extremely remote. Remote, but perfect in every detail. Fantastically reduced, but faultlessly shaped. My marvelous tomorrow, ready to be delivered to me. So then 217, page 217, what is a poem? He describes in this chapter the first poem he wrote. And he's very clear that, of course, in retrospect, it was not a good poem. But what remains is the inspiration for that poem. He asks, what touched it off? I think I know. Without any wind blowing, the sheer weight of a raindrop shining in a parasitic luxury on a cordate leaf caused its tip to dip, and what looked like a globule of quicksilver performed a sudden glissando down the center vein. And then he goes on and then ends up, the stanza I was already muttering resembled the shock of wonder I had experienced when for a moment heart and leaf had been one. So this moment where that promise of vital consciousness explodes or embraces the moment. What else can you do except write a poem, a piece of music? There's nothing else that can be. Nabokov consistently says he's an unmusical being. So he would never have thought to write a piece of music. But no matter the outcome, the experience that tips off the creative act, I think is always something like this. We may individually have totally different language for it, totally different understanding of where our ideas come from. But I think at a core, all of us have these moments, and the only rational response is to write. He says here, on the next page, page 218, he's described all kinds of, well, let me just read. Lost in thought, he taps his knee with his wand-like pencil, and at the same instant a car, New York license plate, passes along the road. A child bangs the screen door of a neighboring porch. An old man yawns in a misty Turkestan orchard. A granule of cinder-gray sand is rolled by the wind on Venus. A Dr. Jacques Hirsch in Grenoble puts on his reading glasses, and trillions of other such trifles occur, all forming an instantaneous, yeah, there's something loose in my tripod, or the little clippy thing I have clipped onto a shelf. Trillions of other such trifles occur, all forming an instantaneous and transparent organism of events, of which the poet, sitting in a lawn chair at Ithaca, New York, is the nucleus. Right? So that's that moment when the entire cosmos is... And look, there's nothing egotistical about this. He's not saying that the poet is the center of... it's the awareness of all of this. And to do that, you really you lose the self. You have to. There's no self in that moment. The heart and the leaf had been one. page 275. We're getting there. As I'm reading this, I realize I probably should have just read the whole book. The spiral, this is page 275. The spiral is a spiritualized circle. In the spiral form, the circle, uncoiled, unwound, has ceased to be vicious. It has been set free. A colored spiral in a small ball of glass. This is how I see my own life. It's a step away from life becomes it becomes a ball, it becomes an object. Page 297. This is the last one that I wrote down. Probably because it's the last page of the book. Here we go. Oh, this is a longer one. I'm going to read it. But I think it's where love and tenderness fill the space of the moment that Nabokov has described, that vital clarity of consciousness is a trillion memories, is the poetic moment, and is ultimately this love. When that slow motion, silent explosion of love takes place in me, unfolding its melting fringes and overwhelming me with the sense of something much vaster, much more enduring and powerful than the accumulation of matter or energy in any imaginable cosmos. Then my mind cannot but pinch itself to see if it is really awake. I have to make a rapid inventory of the universe, just as a man in a dream tries to condone the absurdity of his position by making sure he is dreaming. I have to have all space and all time participate in my emotion, in my mortal love, so that the edge of its mortality is taken off, thus helping me to fight the utter degradation, ridicule, and horror of having developed an infinity of sensation and thought within a finite existence. I am left to my own, not negligible devices when I think of the best things in life. So, thank you for sitting with me as I ran through a summary of some highlights from Speak Memory. And if you have any questions or comments, or if you have your own experience with this book or anything by Nabokov, I could certainly hear from you and enjoy talking about it, because I love this. And I don't remember the last time I read this. Earlier this year, I reread Ada and Lolita, and the Brian Boyd biography, the 2-volume biography. But then I moved away for a moment from Nabokov, and I've just picked this back up. Anyway, keep your wits about you, my friends.